Hello and welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook. I'm Xalavier Jr. again from over at Strange Scaffold, the developers of Space, Warlord, Organ Trading Simulator, and the upcoming El Paso Elsewhere, among other titles. As a writer and creative, I've worked on nearly 80 titles now, with credits ranging from Magic the Gathering to Stranger Things VR to Hypnospace Outlaw to Skatebird and beyond. And today I had the immense pleasure of chatting with Sean Krankel and Adam Hines of Night School Studio. They just released Oxenfree II Lost Signals on Netflix, PC, PlayStation, and Switch. If you have a phone and a Netflix subscription, you can be playing the original Oxenfree and Oxenfree II included with your subscription right now. And we got to dig into what it takes to run a studio long term, how their creative sensibilities and their journey has evolved over time, and even how they might adapt I Think You Should Leave to the medium of video games. So without further ado, you have a great time ahead of you. These are incredibly knowledgeable people who have helped define what it means to tell stories in games today, and you're in for a real treat. So strap in. Let's go.
Bury me where you can't see water.
Come in, Riley. If you're there, pick up, please.
Yeah, hi.
Welcome to Kamina. Over the last few months, Kamina's been overrun with disruptions in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Oh, crap. It's like this unexplained phenomena.
You'll be placing transmitters in and around the coastline. These transmitters will provide us the data we need to figure out what's happening. Riley! Listen to me! You have to turn it off! Do you understand me?
Wait, what is that? Did you see that?
Riley!
What the hell just happened? I think we might be stuck in a loop. What's this?
Looks like the cult had a seance.
This isn't for you. We've done this before.
Riley!
You doing okay, kiddo?
Riley, are you still there? You're getting garbled.
Bury me.
The Grand Duke of York had 10,000 men. He marched them to the top and back down again. You have 10,000 lives, Riley. Don't waste them all getting lost in the woods. You can't stop what's coming.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
Let's just see what this does.
Okay, you first.
So people have probably asked you this dozens of times, all the times. The two worst questions for a dev to receive are, when is your game coming out? And how do you feel now that it's out? I'm going to ask you the second one. How are you feeling now that Oxenfree II is finally out?
Yeah, the first one, thank goodness we don't have to tap dance around that anymore. But the second one, yeah, I mean, it's super exciting, specifically because we feel so good about it being literally our best game. I mean, I think we're so proud of the work that went into it, and the fact that it's out in the world, and that the response has been really positive is equal parts a relief and also exciting, because I feel like we made some choices in it that could have been too controversial, perhaps, or some choice. We can get into that later. But yeah, like I think that there was a little bit of nail biting leading up to launch, but now just really excited.
Yeah, it just feels great to have it out and have people be responding to it. It was definitely, at least from my perspective, our smoothest launch. I'm always kind of biting my nails watching live streams when it's like the first week or so. I was just like, oh, are they going to trip on this bug we didn't know about? But it's been going really well.
What do you think assisted in the smoothness of that launch?
We just had a lot of extra time this time to really polish and weed out any of those kind of more egregious bugs that if we had to have pushed it out 6 months or 8 months in advance, we probably wouldn't have been able to catch. So yeah, it was just that extra time to really kind of marinate in the game and really get it up to speed.
I think we also, since we've the first game, for reference, when we shipped that game, we had just like 4 core team members, and then maybe another 15 people touched it over the course of development. But this game, I would say it was closer to like 18 core team members, and then a much broader set of folks also helping ship. So just everything from, launch ops to everything else was more buttoned up. So yeah, we had more time, but we also just had more eyeballs on it and hammering on it in a more rigorous way than we had in the past.
When we talk about production, it's really interesting discussing that line in video games, because if you look at film, if you look at music, literature, almost anything, there isn't a linear relationship between the amount of money and time you put into it and how good it is. You can put 8 years into a pile of garbage in basically any other artistic medium outside of video games, because video games, we're also a technical medium, and you made a very state-based game. You chose to inflict this on yourself over and over again, and that gives you purely more time to, as you said, marinate in the game, work out bugs, figure out what's missing. Oh shoot, we didn't record this one actor for this one line 7,000 branches down. As you make these games, and as the games get bigger, and as everyone in the industry feels their games getting bigger, how do you feel your relationship to the work changing, and how long you want to spend on a single project?
That's a good question. Yeah. And we talk about it a lot. The amount of time that we spend making a game should really be equal to both our passion for the project, how much time that we really want to devote to this concept and this core idea that we really want to express. But also, we don't want to spend, like you say, like 6-8 years on something that has a very, very potential small audience too, because we really want to be responsible to ourselves, to the people that are working on it, just to give these things the best chance to get a return when we actually put these things out. It's one thing to spend 6 months to a year with a very small team on something that's pretty experimental, that might have a very tiny core audience. But if you're going to devote that much money and that much time into something, you should really be anticipating a lot of people have something to take interest in that. So for us, we're trying to not make necessarily much bigger games, but just games that fulfill more time for players to come into in different ways. So if the core experience of Oxenfree II, let's say, takes between 6 and 10 hours, we just want to make sure that there's a lot of reasons to go back and play it again, because there's a lot of different choices and you want to check out those different endings. Your friends might have told you that, if you take this branch, you get a totally different character conversation. So it's for me, at least, it's less about just the size and the scope of the game, but making it smarter too, and just using our resources in ways that are just most effective to give the most quality and the most content within the time that you'll be spending on the game.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we, honestly, since the studio started, we have been just stapling on new bits of tools and stapling on new bits of pipeline and process, like everybody does, right? But like, we're feeling a lot of that pain now. And so like I was at Adam's daughter's 3-year-old birthday, 2 weeks ago, and somebody was asking like, what's it like making a night school game? And I'm like, sometimes it's really freaking painful, because it feels like you're trying to make the Sistine Chapel out of toothpicks. Like, it's like this very weird, highly specified skill set that requires our designers to be very technical, that working within our existing tools, they have to both have an eye for cinematography and staging. And they're honestly like, every designer is kind of directing in the moment. And so for us, I think to your question, we, for this next phase of the studio, really want to take a breather and go, all right, let's look at our tools. Let's do a real proper addressing of the tech debt that we have. Let's not just keep creating potentially new issues for ourselves that are very specific to decisions we made 5 years ago on games that are already out. And how do we make it, like, I kind of hate the juice for the squeeze phrase, but like, yeah, let's make it easier to get the juice. I think that like for our games, certainly the ones that we've made so far, the duration of playtime, it's pretty painful for our team to make it sing. It's fun and amazing at the end, but it's not like, a game where you would start with a prototype with like a really clear mechanic and just find the fun immediately and then kind of build on that and let it grow. And like for us, it's more like every single thing is bespoke. Every single scene, every single bit of blocking, every bit of character animation, every pause in a line read is all bespoke. So we, long story longer, want to find ways to improve our tools to make it less painful to make games that are similar to what we make.
In a sense, you've created and continue to create this immersive sim like foundation for conversation games specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine one of the reasons it's difficult to tear yourself away from those tools, as much as they introduce tech debt, is they're the things that let you do exactly what you're doing. So, what does it look like for you to think about the future and how those tools evolve with the additional time and support that you have? Is part of your next dev cycle going to be actually cleaning up?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what you said about this being basically like conversation simulators is something that's so on point that we were even talking about in a meeting yesterday where like we probably, I would guess Night School has more like choices per minute than than any other maybe story games. I don't know if that's not a badge of honor. It's just like a thing that we kind of painted ourselves into that corner of saying like we want players to feel like they can fulfill like just basically wear the shoes of a character that is close to who they are and carry on a conversation that's close to the way that you naturally would. That doesn't always mean like a big world changing goal every 5 minutes. It means more like every 10 seconds. How can I have a surprising, subtle and nuanced personality test unfold? Like when you're talking to this other character. So to us, part of what we're also thinking about is like, well, is being a super specific moment to moment conversation simulation in the micro with these types of line reads, these types of animations, this type of performance. Do we want to challenge that? Like I look at a lot of other games that are out there that do, everybody does so many different methods of storytelling, right? Like you've got Tears of the Kingdom, we'll have a fully voiced cutscene and then we'll go right back to the kind of tried and true Zelda, what? Yeah, moments with line reads. Or I love how crazy Yakuza feels, where they're mixing and matching storytelling styles all over the place, right? So I think for us, not that we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and move away from what has made our games special, but I think we actually want to take a hard look at like what does story mean, and does story have to be real-time conversation simulation with so much bespoke fingerprints all over it? Is there anything that we can do to take a step back and tell stories as effectively, yet without as much painstaking effort on a per designer basis?
Yeah. When we founded the studio, we always said we wanted to just tell stories in new ways, and we never said and that always means hyper realistic conversational systems that come into play. Our first game, Oxenfree, and our game since have really leaned into that, based kind of purely on just our interest at the time and our skill set. I just really like writing dialogue and that back and forth, just how people put things and where they put their pauses and how you can interrupt, and that was just very just interesting to achieve. And it was one of those. It was a very clear goal that we felt that we could attain with our small team. But yeah, now that we've grown and we have a couple games under our belt, we're definitely interested in just exploring other things. We're nervous of becoming a very predictable studio when we have a lot of other ideas of how to really approach this.
One of the ideas I had seen you discuss in an interview was wanting to adapt I Think You Should Leave, which is, as a fellow narrative person, one of the most exciting and terrifying things I can ever consider doing. I'm interested. I Think You Should Leave means so many different things to so many different people. What do you think that I Think You Should Leave and things on the edge of this. I'd talk about it like apocalypse comedy. The world is on fire, and so a giant hot dog man saying we're all looking for the guy who did this somehow speaks to us on a level that a lot of traditional comedy and even blockbuster hits that have come out in the past, they just don't hit the same way they used to. But the hot dog man or the driving crooner is there for us in this time.
Crooner.
So what do you think that, like, I think you should leave represents for the game medium and can do inside of the game medium that we don't traditionally think of our storytelling sensibilities as having even access to?
That I'm so curious, Sean, what your answer is to this, because I definitely would be way too scared to try and adapt. I think you should leave for a game, because like you say, to me it would be like trying to adapt a Tim and Eric show into a game, or just that style of comedy for me is so particular and kind of comes out of the ether of that writing team and that mind that for me watching that show, half of those skits totally whiff past my head. I'm like, I don't get at all what I'm watching, and the other half I'm rolling on the floor. And it would be a really interesting challenge, though, to try and make that interactable, because I feel like so much of the genius of that show is the surprises and is the kind of like slowly realizing what the joke is and how they're going to like build on it and change it and subvert that.
There's also the discomfort, right?
Yeah, too.
And when I think of like when you mentioned Tim and Eric, I would think a Tim and Eric game would be intentionally uncomfortable a lot, and at minimum, that would be terrifying to bring to your investor or publisher and say, "Hey, so for a good 15 minutes, you're just going to press the A button repeatedly while the camera slowly zooms in on a man's face until the entire screen distorts. Is that okay?" That's the way you would pull off those jokes in interactive form, but that would be terrifying to commit to as a playable principle.
I feel like the place to start, I mean, I think what both you guys are saying is just keying into the absurdity of it, and that there's no ceiling to the absurdity. Mm-hmm. Like it just can get either so goddamn stressful that it is that it hurts, or it can be so just being unexpected. And so for me, it's actually like I would want to approach it less from how a writer's room would look at it and more from like what player verbs can make you feel those feelings. So like, as you guys were talking, I'd be like, what if we did Hitman, but that way? Like put you in a situation where you think you're going to solve a thing, and then each next step that you take that you think is going to work well, throw some absurd sideways stuff at you that is going to make it more difficult, and then layer in really great sort of narrative context and a narrative system, maybe akin to the stuff that we've already built. But like, I'd want to find like other player verbs. I think writing can't do all of it. You know, I think it's got to be, how does the player touch the experience?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about how the player touches the experience and that balance between narrative and mechanics, that's something that y'all have always been trying to balance and approach in different ways with every project. And one of the ones that I think of the most in that lens is After Party. After Party, at least especially the early pitches around it, were centered on this, what sounded like a systemic understanding of what drinking and talking and socializing does to alter your interactions with people. And from what I understand, that was also one of the most difficult dev cycles y'all have had. So what did the experience of working on After Party end up teaching you?
So much. Go for it.
I know. I'm sure we have a lot. For me, the main thing it taught me was probably to really figure out exactly what that core idea can really be in terms of the mechanics and how that can fit with the story, with really strong examples, and really kind of taking the time to really figure out what the cadence of everything will be, how you'll actually kind of earn by playing the game that feeling that we really want to get across. Because we would say for months and months and months, this game is about partying your way out of hell. And we're like, that'll be so easy to make into a narrative game. And then we get into it and we're like, God, like there's so many factors here. There's so many directions that we can take. And if it's only conversation and then taking these, what kind of amounts to just magical potions to transform your personality, does that really feel like partying your way out of hell, or does it feel like something else? And if it feels like something else, should we lean into that then and really kind of like change what this game is? So it was just always and I really love where that game ended up, but it was definitely a big challenge getting there and finding how to take the fun out of these scenes, while also giving you this core feeling of you're having the craziest night out. And it was really hard to fulfill that continually, because the craziest night out, I'm sure everyone's picturing like a hyper fast cut scene of like a ton of bespoke things. You're outside and you're inside and you're on the back of a fire truck and doing all these things. All this stuff that would just take so long to make in a game. You have to have repeatable systems and repeatable things. So yeah, for me, it was definitely kind of just don't fall in love too quickly with what you think this game should be. Really take that time early on and work with the mechanics and let the game kind of tell you what it should be instead of necessarily maybe trying to force it.
Yeah, it was. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, after you.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, I think Adam put it pretty eloquently. I think it was stuff where we immediately fell in love with a core idea that we believed in so much, but that had a million different veins that could come off of it. And we would tap a couple. And I mean, we prototyped all kinds of weird things where there was like a pee meter where you had to go pee frequently, and the drunk meter where you'd black out and then you'd wake up somewhere else like Dark Souls, and like all these things that on their own actually were okay, but were not gelling naturally. And that was a big pain point where we were like, okay, we want to have 4 or 5 systems talk to our narratives or dialogue system that they weren't chocolate and peanut butter. Like they just weren't matching up the way that you would want. So ultimately where we landed is that, yeah, like it is a way to, there are augments to your inbound dialogue that are personality focused, right? And then there are a few mini games that overlap with the dialogue system so that they can feel kind of like rubbing your belly and patting your head at the same time. But beyond that, those are the major innovations design wise from what we had done from Oxenfree. And I think we had initially set out to push on those other player verbs more, and we just didn't end up landing there. And I do think it was to the benefit of the game, honestly. Like I think had we tried to cram too much of that stuff in, even if we were in love with it, it would have removed what made the heart of it feel good. Like we still really feel good about where that game landed. But as we look to the future, I think we're always trying to figure out what's the door into our games. Like, are we a narrative game with some other mechanics? Are we an adventure game with some great narrative? Like, even if it's the same thing, it's just what's that door in? And I think that we, for the first 6 months with After Party, the door in sounded more raucous than what we were actually building. You know, it's not like Party Your Way Out of Hell sounded like it could have been WarioWare with talking or something. Yeah. And hell, I mean, maybe we should have made that. Sounds kind of cool. So anyways, yeah, I think it made us learn that we have to have a strong central core that we are constantly testing against, and that core needs to be practical and real, and not like Party Your Way Out of Hell, which is a great log line. You know, it's not practical though.
Yeah.
So what I love about those series of answers, I love so much about them, but one of my favorite things is what you mentioned about listening to what the game wants to be. And when your games come together at the end, either because of your studio process or because of the genre you're working in, how do you get better at listening to what your game is? How do you train your ear for that?
I feel like you work here right now at that one. That's like literally, right? Is that not the kinds of
we talk about all the time? Yeah.
Is it something that you get better at?
Yeah. Well, we're definitely still learning this, how to just kind of be honest with ourselves and brave enough to raise your hand in the meeting and say, I really don't think this scene should go this way. I really feel like we should lean into the exploration because that's just where the fun is, and less the chit chat, or we should lean into the chit chat because the exploration is really getting in the way. And just really play testing it a lot and playing it when it's pretty early and rough, because we always kind of, it's a valid excuse, but it is still an excuse that we always say, well, it'll get good when the art's in and when the sound's in and when everything's like singing and perfectly polished and there's no bugs. And it's like, well, sure, yeah, but then at that point it's too late. You can't change anything. You can't really make modifications. You can't improve on it because it's done, and you have to move on. So we've really started to try to just play it early, play it when it's just boxes, play it in script form, just when it's on the page, like literally make the choices and just see if it feels good. And then adjust from there and just try and be really honest with ourselves about what we can make and what we want to make in the time that we have. And it's okay to change things and change course. And it always ends up improving the process and improving the game, as long as you still have that like 1 or 2 or 3 core principles of what we all wanted this game to be. Things start to get a little wiggly when we're like, okay, let's just listen to what the game wants to be. And it starts to totally change genres and new characters are getting added. And it becomes this weird octopus of like, I don't even know what we're making now, but we're just chasing fun. As long as you have that core thing of like, we know we want it to be scary, we know we want it to be heartfelt, and we know you want to fall in love with this particular character. It's like there's so many ways to achieve that. So really just being very honest with ourselves during the process.
Yeah, I also think, and this is not the most practical thing, but for our studio, it's just the time. It's consistently been the moment that we have conviction. We have to get to a vertical slice earlier than later with our games. Like we just actually have to polish something all the way to go, okay, this is the promise of the whole thing. So like certainly getting stuff off the page and in engine and playing it early gets us way closer to being able to squint to see the game and feel pretty damn good about it. But it still leaves a lot of question marks. It still leaves a lot of question marks about performance or about what fidelity does that NPC need to be moving at? How much work do we need to put into just certain things that we don't know until we final it? And so like every time from Oxenfree through After Party through Oxenfree II, there were always like big question marks. And then in production, of course, we're trying to do a more reasoned production timeline where we're not trying to take something to final early and you have that push and pull in the studio where like this is going to screw up the whole timeline, air quotes, screw it up. But the reality is if you don't look at something final, at least in the games that we've made, it's still just speculative. And so like I remember with After Party, our breakthrough moment was that first walk up through First and Izzard, which is a scene a little bit further into the game, and then going into the bar and playing beer pong and meeting some key characters, excuse me, and like ordering a couple drinks. It's not just seeing the mechanics and the scripts at play, but it's seeing the world, it's seeing where the camera's going to be, it's seeing how audio bleeds in and out, like all that stuff. At least for our games, we kind of need to get to 10 to 20 minutes of real like shippable stuff before we have faith in it. I wish it wasn't that way, honestly, but yeah, for our games, we're kind of stuck there.
Yeah. And it's good just to teach us like what good is, like how much time it's going to take to get it good. Yeah.
I know a lot of teams are actually struggling with that exact thing right now because more and more people, even for non-narrative games, they're acknowledging the importance of narrative to bringing people back, tying them into, in the most exploitative terms, an IP. We make an IP via characters. We need them to care about the characters. I'm kind of stunned how often I see, even for notoriously anti-narrative teams or dynamics, those people hiring now a senior or lead narrative designer because they see the value of this. And as they're doing so, they're running into something that you have seen time and time again, which is, oh God, especially when you're doing branching narrative, especially when you're doing experimental narrative or narrative that has to work within a larger structure. Does this work? Does this work? How do we know this works? How much of the game has to be finished for us to know that this works? Someone please tell us that this game is going to work. So for you, you've discussed this a little bit. Can you elaborate on how much of a game at this point do you think needs to be complete for you to get that picture of what it is so you can make the rest of it?
Yeah. And Adam, you'll probably have a more nuanced or insightful answer to this, but I feel like for us, it's actually not always a traditional vertical slice that has to be representative of a lot of the actual gameplay and features. For us, it's actually more, again, on these prior games, it has been about almost like a hype demo. It's like, for us, it's getting the vibe across. Do you walk away from it wanting more? And so that means the core mechanics are there, but that also means that we've introduced the characters in a way that don't require a bunch of esoteric backstory. It means that, yeah, did we grab you in 20 minutes without you reading a lore Bible beforehand? Did we make you make some choices that felt awful or great? Did we subvert your expectations for how the systems in the game would work? Do we make it not feel like it's a bunch of binary right, wrong answers, but rather by the end of it, you're like, oh, I am this character. So all of that, it's a little squishy. It's not super defined, but we call it more like hype demos internally than we do call it a vertical slice, because I feel like a vertical slice is a little more loaded and a little more expected. Like, you expect it to be more feature complete, and our stuff doesn't necessarily have to be super feature complete before we have conviction in it. But it does have to be arted and audioed and everything other than like final acting, basically. Like, we don't want caveats, because when we find ourselves getting in trouble the most, it's when we're caveating stuff. Oh, you trust me, you'll be partying your way out of hell.
Can you give me another good example of caveating that you ran into on one of your projects?
Oh, yeah. We've definitely done things where it's like, well, they're not playing any of the animations. We didn't have time to get any of the animations for the conversations, and you can hear the audio, but the characters just kind of walking along, and it just makes it very dull. And we honestly kind of were surprised making Oxenfree 1 when we just put everything in, but we hadn't put in the emotes and them moving their hands and them, going like this or shaking their fists when they're mad. Because we're like, well, they're walking, you're not going to be moving that much. But we realized you have to kind of crank it up to like vaudeville level of acting, because they're, at least in our previous games, they're so small on the screen. You really want to feel their emotions when they're reading these lines. It just adds so much. So that was a big caveat for us that thankfully it paid off when we did add those animations, and it was okay. But we're like, it's not really working yet, but don't worry, it'll get there,
Yeah, that's like I think all of the presentational stuff we end up caveating a lot and don't want to. And so that's a piece. The other one is definitely just like general puzzle or interaction design. Like, it's not that we go insert fun here later or something like that, but there's definitely a degree of like we can get close to that accidentally at times. And so not to say that certainly the games that we've made so far are not the most like you're playing The Witness or some highly complex puzzles, but we do need to have puzzles in there, or we do need to have the complementary mechanics at least surface in a way that tickles the player's brain a bit. And at times we have not done that. At times we've gone like, well, this scene, we chose it because maybe it's more complex art-wise, and that'll give us production learnings to do early on. But it's like, wait, is it one of the more fun areas of the game, or is it just one of the more complicated to make ones of the game? And so we want to make sure the fun stuff is in there, because the fun is going to not just come from a well-written and paced conversation. It's going to come from the other player verbs. So yeah, that's the part. I don't know. We just haven't really figured it out yet, other than to say that we just got to like final 10 to 20 minutes of a game as early as possible, which is scary and daunting and creates internal arguments all the time. But then when it ships, like internal ships, everybody's high-fiving and loves it. So I actually think it's more about how we frame it with the team, which we might not be doing well.
Yes. But yeah, I totally agree. That's pretty much what it takes always, is like just getting that first 10 to 20 minutes. And then, we kind of have all the confidence then to make the next 6 to 8 hours. But we definitely need that chunk to be like, okay, this is an actual game. This can work. I want more.
I think another thing that studios struggle with when it comes to narrative is also that kind of hope deferred effect, where you have the morale booster of, oh, this isn't just assets completed. This is actually really good. For El Paso Elsewhere, which is an upcoming title for my studio, we had that giant moment happen when the final voice acting started to come in, and it was recorded and it was started to be placed in scenes, and it was like, oh, holy cow, this is an entire new way of seeing our game. And that was a giant morale booster for the entire studio.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, you've mentioned that the hype demo is a big milestone for your studio in terms of internal belief around the game. Are there any other big moments that teach y'all that the game is working or that help the entire team commit to a vision that gets everyone excited for the rest of the very hard work of building the next 6 to 8 hours that you've either constructed or that you've learned over time? Just wait. Once the emotes come in, then you're going to really see what this game is again.
Yeah. Another huge one is getting the music in. When the music and the sound design starts to come in and it's over those scenes. Yeah, it's one of those big, like, oh, okay, I am crying now. I do feel like I care about this character. Because before we had Tempt VO in it, and then we got the real actor VO, and then the animations came in, and the cameras are right. It's okay, but still not like punching you in the gut. And then when Andy comes in and puts in his amazing music, that's when it really brings everything just to a really great place. So that to me is always like a huge milestone for getting these scenes to feeling good. And then also to point out when they're not, like when the music does go in and like, you know what, it still needs some space here. It still needs some extra stuff here. It's a huge help. Another thing that is kind of the opposite of your question of a milestone when you realize that things aren't going as well as you thought that they were when everything was kind of in there is we tend to kind of play a lot of our scenes in isolation for a long time. And once the game finally gets to the point where you can play 4 or 5 of these scenes in a row, then you really start to see the full picture and you realize, you know what, we're talking way too much across scenes 2 through 4. Or the opposite typically happens too, where it's like, we didn't even write a conversation for the long walk that they have to take from the pier up to the woods. So it just points out like all the little cracks that we need to fill and all the little things that we need to patch over and make great when we start to play the game in its entirety.
That's the biggest one, honestly. And it's one that we have historically waited a little, not waited, but unintentionally, it just happens a little bit too late in the process at times. But it's also a major breakthrough. Like, and I think getting a full team playthrough is another key thing for that, where it's like having just discipline leads or directors, or whatever, like isolated playthroughs are fine, or asking people to be always playing the game. That's also critical, like that it's part of their day. But there's something extra to like having everybody sit down on a couch together and throw tomatoes at the game, like where you are looking at everybody's disciplines together up on screen and just going, is this thing working as a piece of entertainment, and less about like tighten up the graphics on level 4 type stuff. Like I think it's it getting the team together. It's always tough for us because we go, well, that's like a full day or longer that somebody could be working on X. So in the back of their head, if you haven't scheduled for it during the sprint, you go, that's a waste of time. But the reality is it's critical. It's just absolutely critical to all be looking at it together and pausing the game every 45 seconds and going, oh God, is it really going to be this like fine tooth comb and arduous? But the reality is the results are always better when we do that. So I don't know if that's a process thing that we've gotten good at, but yeah, full team playthroughs and seeing the game clicked out 2 more degrees to see a macro view of a few scenes connected is the biggest breakthrough. Then we go, oh damn, we have a game here instead of just a cool vision or that demo.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned time several times in this interview. It is, as studio founders, something I think is deeply interesting to discuss, because we're always looking out for, I tend to talk to pretty human-centric studio founders, and we're always looking for ways to support our team's use of time and the optimal use of their time. But especially if you're very hands-on leaders, the question is, you discover, oh man, full builds playthroughs are really valuable. Also, we're doing biz dev. Also, we have to coordinate internal schedules and meetings with all the leads. Also, you're writing the game. You're designing the game. You're setting key objectives. There's always more put on the founder's plate, especially as a studio goes on, as you discover ways you can make your team's process better. So how the heck do you continue to subdivide that time and make sure you're still healthy?
We are at a unique crossroads because we've also grown a bit in this last year or two, right? So not only is that time piece of it, I think we've solved some of it, and then we've introduced new problems with some of it. Like the solve for us, or not, I don't want to call it a solve, but the thing's gotten a little bit less painful is that we've hired a few more specialists that we wouldn't have ever had previously because we were wearing all the hats. And so now it's like, oh, we can have a really trusted person in role X that we ultimately as founders need to just lop that limb off in our brain during the day and go, we're going to trust that is moving forward the way that it needs to. And a week later we'll check in, or instead of every couple of hours. That part's generally pretty darn good feeling. But the tough part is, as we've grown, like what used to be organic communication and like use of time, just momentum feeling really good. Like now communication has to be way more intentional. It has to be documented. It has to be just careful, like all these things that I think we previously, because we were right on top of each other in a room and everybody felt the pressure cooker of like, we need to ship by date X for no other reason other than like we'll run out of money and won't exist. So let's keep it moving. And that helps very quickly you be editorial, right? It helps you be, it helps you know if a feature should stay or not, if it's not serving the ultimate sort of critical core vision. So all those, that pressure cooker, once that gets relieved a little bit, and not to say that we don't have all that pressure still, but now that there's a few more people and there are specialists, the new problems that we have is that time can accidentally get wasted because of misalignment. Like we have people that, if we're not aligned perfectly the way that we were before, those 3 or 4 days might go by and you'll be like, oh God, they focused on the wrong thing, or we didn't apply enough pressure to what this should have felt like, or just there was a misunderstanding. Like all these things, these natural human missteps happen a lot more frequently to us now. So in short, I don't know. I don't think that the apps running in the back of our head that you were talking about before of like how to keep forward momentum and wear so many different hats, like you said, from biz dev to marketing to design to just the core creative vision, like that has not left our brain space at all. It's just that now we have a few more people that we trust a lot, but that got more complicated and we're figuring it out still.
Yeah, exactly.
What are the areas that you trust yourself in now when it comes to figuring out the future?
That's a good question. I really trust our just general taste and just what we think is cool and what we like. We are, usually very good at just, like I said, being honest with ourselves about when something is really hitting the mark or when something just feels a little too generic or a little too of a branch of something else, and it's just not what we really wanted to attack and make. Sean and I just have a very we just have a lot of shared interests and a lot of shared reference points, and kind of have a really great, to my mind, cohesive goal of like what every project should feel like, even if it's a different genre, if it's horror, if it's comedy. So just knowing when things are creatively on track and when they're creatively going off track, I still feel like, I just have a lot of trust and faith in us to be able to kind of call out the flare when things are going off or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just to kind of add to that, and similar sentiment is that because we have gone through the ups and downs of starting a studio and things sometimes going extremely sideways, other times things going pretty well. I trust our gut with regards to what we make bets on, because at the end of the day, it's all bets, right? Like none of this is a guarantee that anything's going to work. And I don't trust that every bet we make is going to be a success, but I trust that it's the right one to bet on. You know, it's that it's either the right idea or the right approach to design or the right new design challenge to try and solve or the right story to tell. So that, I don't know, because as studio heads, there's never a roadmap that we're following. trusting our ability to make these bets is scary on the regular, but it also, if we were trepidatious about our decision making process, or if we were just trying to focus test every decision we made to death, I would be a lot more afraid. So yeah, I think I just trust our ability to take that taste that you said and like put it through a prism of, this is a bet that has a decent likelihood of paying off and finding an audience.
Yeah.
So as studio heads, at this point, is there a bet that you even looked at the time as, this will save the studio, this will pull us out of a hole, this funding deal is going to make everything work? Is there any bets that you either didn't take or that ended up falling through for whatever reason, that in hindsight you're like, thank God, this is why night school is still here?
I have one. We might want to edit this out later.
Is it NDA-ish?
It's not NDA-ish. It's not NDA-ish.
Always a great sign.
Exactly. And I won't call out any specific names. But we, fairly early in the studio's existence, we had an opportunity to partner very strongly with another company that had a great pitch. We left this pitch being like, these guys are going places. These are geniuses. And it was all about interactivity in many different forms of like interactive TV shows, interactive music videos, kind of getting it into your faces through every possible portal, your phone, your TV, your toaster. You're just going to be able to like interact with these really cool shorts and films. And Sean and I, of course, love TV and movies. And we're like, God, we could be making games and these really cool, awesome, innovative, meaningful, linear narrative that's being turned into having a lot of interactivity into it. And we were having like lunches being like, God, we should just like do this now. This should just be what we do, like along with games. And the more that we didn't jump in though with both of our feet and our heads underwater immediately. And it was very wise too, because as we slowly kind of started to make more incremental deals with them and kind of agree to help them out on their process, they just turned out to be a lot more messy than we realized and a lot more kind of unfocused. So some of their stuff has come out, some of it hasn't. But I just remember that being a moment where we had a lot of faith for a couple months that this thing was going to explode, and it didn't really.
You did a good job talking around it. But yeah, that is funny. And that's like circa 2016, late 2016. I think we thought there might have been a pivot point for the studio, and then didn't do it. And that was good. I think another bet, like there were a couple times leading up to what ultimately became us becoming a part of Netflix, where we had interest from other parties to like work really closely or to get an investment or whatever. And none of it was like, woohoo, we're going to change our lives forever. But it was the type of thing that as an independent studio, we were like, let's look deeply into this, because we want security to ultimately for us keep taking chances. Like we want to be the studio that takes chances creatively. So hopefully we don't have to take too many chances business wise, which we still end up doing semi-regularly. But long story short, yeah, there are 2 or 3 of those partnerships that got semi far along, or relationships that got that far along that just ended. And yeah, in retrospect, I'm really glad that they ended, because I've seen where some of those places have gone. It's just like it wasn't the right, marriage. So in general, I think just back to that trusting our gut thing, when we made those calls, sometimes we felt insane afterwards. We're looking at the bank account going, well, we might be gone by December. And then, and then we just turned away this other opportunity, but it fundamentally would have shifted just what we even do, like for any of those scenarios, the one that he brought up or the one that I just brought up.
So you've talked several times about the bank account draining down as well, which Strange Scaffold being around now 4.5 years. Thank you. I've seen the up and the down and the swing and you're making the game and the bank account is just draining away. When you're thinking, when you were thinking about standing on your own 2 feet as a studio, and what is necessary to get the game out the door while still delivering a great experience for players, how were you ranking priorities at any given moment to make sure that you keep food on the table, that you're looking for a deal far enough ahead of time that you can make the next game?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we're always trying to do is make sure that whatever we're working on has the potential to be big, which doesn't ever mean that it will inherently be big. But what I mean by that is like we first and foremost, even if the way that our games come to life might be very strange and specific and only like come from a few folks that work in the studio, the themes and the structure and the ideas we want to be big, like as big as, I mean, maybe not like Barbie big, but big, you know, like as big as possible that people could, that anybody could grab onto it, because that is the foundation for our business. Like we want that when each one comes out, that has hit sort of potential. In the middle of making that, then everything can ladder up into that. So if we go out and try to get a partnership with a first party or whatever, we can sell that it's not that we're making just a very strange esoteric experience, but that this has the potential to be big, and here's why. And then so every decision from the features that we would add it to a game, to story decisions, to who are we going to, contract to work on it, to just basically all of it has to ladder up into like, do we have faith not just that this thing is cool, which is always important to us, but also can it have an audience outside of like the two of us? If we find anything veering, either being like, oh, we chase some ancillary new business opportunity, even though it sounds like some nice money on the side that could help, like, is it going to actually break us? Is it going to stop our big bet from coming out, right? Or is it going to slow that so much? And those are the really hard decisions, because you go, there's some money right now for a great contract gig for a partner that whatever, one of us worked with person X in the past and they're willing to hook us up to make a small licensed game or whatever. And to say no to that is so hard. But when you check it against like the big bet, then that just always kind of wins out. Now, we did do some licensed games that we also were like really proud of, and that those inherently were not, cash grabs. They were things that we still think had to check back against what Adam said earlier, which is like, we want to let people interact with story in new ways. We want new, like impressive new player verbs to show up. And so the Mr. Robot game that we did. Thank you. Yeah. Like that was
social
very
engineering
intentional.
game I still bring up in design discussions years later.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Wait, ask Adam what his favorite game is that we've made.
What's your
Mr.
favorite
Robot.
Yeah.
No, I do. We made it really quick, and for me, it's this perfect little toy that kind of executes on all your wishes for what it would do. Like once you boot it up, you're like, oh, it's a messaging app, and everything that you try kind of works in a cool way. Yeah.
I miss that game. It's delisted. You can't even get it now, man.
Really?
Yeah, it's no like. So I think Universal had
like
it, and
PT.
then it's just gone. It got pulled. Yeah, it's like the PT of mobile games. I mean, we have a build, but that's it. Yeah.
Speaking of builds, like, how do you handle archival for stuff like that? Because obviously you can't share that publicly, but do you, either in a grandiose sense of future generations will behold the beginnings that were night school, or in the more humble view, we want to be able to look at this 30 years down the line? Are you actively archiving your process and your builds and your screenshots of games as they evolve?
We're not as good as I wish we were. I'm always impressed when I see other teams and you see like the day one of the studio opening and here's the dollar in my living room on the couch and like we don't have a lot of that. Unfortunately. Fortunately, we're cousins, so we have pictures of us going back to being children. But yeah, there's not a lot of archival of the early days other than some concept art. It's funny, even with Oxenfree, like we moved very quickly from concept to in-game art. I mean, I think we probably spent only a month on concept and then straight into like building
There's
stuff,
like
right?
12 pure concept pieces of Oxenfree, and that's about it. Yeah.
But in the last, I'd say 3 years, I think we've gotten a lot better at documenting process, at doing really deep sort of retros into what we've done and trying to make actionable things and not just do a retro and go like, yeah, that sucked. Okay, let's not do it again. Like we really try to change that process. I think, with regards to even just, saving the games that either didn't get made or didn't get published or the ones that are now, delisted. We have all of that, but we're not organized. No, I mean, it's like sitting in random places.
Yeah.
So we want to get better at that. That's why, again, like this is the first time I think that we've ever shipped a game and we can take a bit of a breather, like we're not taking a super breather. There's a bunch of stuff still happening in parallel, but there's a few core folks where we're like, okay, let's really address tech debt now and make sure that moving forward it's less painful, and also let's clean up the past a bit in other ways. So it's probably a little more like finding a bunch of photo albums around the house vibes around here and less a rigorous archival process.
Yeah.
So I really want to dig into Oxenfree and Oxenfree II, but one last question speaking to the wider overall landscape of what your studio has accomplished. Very small side tangent. I love that in the time that Night School has been alive, y'all have shipped a significant number of games in this genre. So it's not just one or two, including the Mr. Robot game. If you were lucky enough to get in on the ground floor, like some of the OGs out there, there's this entire portfolio of creativity that we can follow and see how y'all have grown as storytellers. But what is your favorite mechanic or narrative element that you're glad you cut from a game so far?
Man, glad. I honestly don't know if I have one. I think all the stuff that we cut, I just cry over.
I've got one.
And wish was in, so yeah.
We on the last, it might have even been the last 2 games, we have started with the idea of, for the writers, thinking about like dramatically changing the rate at which some dialogue choices degrade. And so right now it's all pretty unified. It'll be like, okay, 3 pop up and then they go away. And those timers can change uniformly across all 3, but not individually. But we have played with the idea that they're really changing pretty dramatically. There was a pixel art like ninja game that had great story in it that I am forgetting the name of right now, that came out maybe like
you were in like a nightclub.
Which one?
The Messenger?
No.
Katana Zero?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that game's so great, but like the thing that I loved in that was that they really played with like dialogue timers in weird ways, and that were tied to your emotional state, right? It would be like, oh, I'm raging right now, so first I'm going to see the pissed off thing, but then if I wait, maybe a more measured response will show up. And so there have been a lot of discussions among our team about how to play with the rate of choices coming and going, but and at the end of the day we may still do that. Like it's a pretty cool concept, but I think we also wrestle with accessibility in our games, because people are trying to read and parse what's going on and make a choice, and like for person X it may be very different than person Y, how quickly they can read, how much time they want to spend on it. So adding even more complexity into that, we're like not trying to make the Dark Souls of conversations around here. And I think that if we had that variability in every single choice and did it as much as we talked about, like in the early days of Oxenfree II, it would have just felt really different. So yeah, I'm glad we didn't do it, but I also don't think we shouldn't like explore it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So Oxenfree being the game that kicked off the studio and established so much of your identity, coming back to it, what was something that you knew you could not do or rely upon to make that sequel?
That's a good question. Yeah, I would say the thing that we really didn't want to just assume that everyone would think is great is basically just having a full retread of what that first game was. Meaning you're Alex again, you're those teens, you just have another problem, and you know that you're gonna walk around an island or a part of the town and kind of talk out your issues and tune into some stuff. We really wanted to have a lot of surprises in this game, surprises based on who you're playing as and where it goes, how the first game kind of interweaves into it. and references the events of what you did in the first one. Because we talked a lot about whether or not we wanted to make a kind of more direct sequel to Oxenfree 1 and kind of kick off right where that game ended and have you be right back in the shoes of Alex. And it felt like kind of an easy win just because people really fell in love with that character and really related to her. But we felt that it would be kind of a betrayal almost of that first game to have like, and now another adventure of the Scooby-Doo gang. Now they're dealing with the werewolves of this town. So it was kind of scary saying, we're going to totally change characters. We're going to age her up. The tone is going to be a little different now. It's going to be a little bit more adult. But it was definitely the right call to kind of risk certain fans being like, you know what? The reason why I would play an Oxenfree 2 was to play as Alex. We just felt that the world was rich enough to contain more stories and different characters.
So with Oxenfree 2, you've pretty massively expanded the scope of the visuals in particular to deliver on this world and the fidelity. When you're looking at, again, how you scale up a vision that was originally built around being the tight thing that you could build with the resources you had, how are you looking at which elements can even scale up without losing the heart of what makes Oxenfree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us, we really looked at early just examples of just sequels that we really loved to original movies that were great. So we looked at Terminator. We looked at Alien. We basically looked at everything John Cameron had made. Where we were like, God, they did such a good job of keeping the core of the feeling of what fans really loved about this first one, but just amplifying stuff and changing things in a really fun way. So it's like Terminator to Terminator 2. Arnold is now the good guy, and there's a brand new, even worse Terminator. And from Alien to Aliens, just really amping up all of the threat of what's going on against the heroes. Instead of one alien now, it's thousands and there's a queen. But then at the same time, the heroes feel much more equipped to just deal with the problem. It goes from space truckers to space marines that are loaded and they have guns and flamethrowers, but they're still overmatched. So we definitely wanted to kind of take that philosophy and apply it to Oxenfree 2, where you know what you're going to get in general, but the issue is going to be a lot bigger. So the world map should be expanded. You should be able to kind of hang out in this town that's only referenced in the first one. So we get to kind of show you stuff that was only hinted at first. And then because the problem's so much bigger, we wanted the character that you're playing as to just feel more like she can handle it. So she's not going to be a teenager anymore. She's going to be an adult who's come back to town, who's already gone through a lot of stuff, and has her own personal issues, but is more confident when things start to explode around her. So for us, it was trying to maintain the heart and the soul of that first one, while just giving the players more of what they really liked about the first one. So more places to visit, more characters to talk to. That's what really led us to adding the walkie-talkie into the sequel. So yeah, because we knew we didn't want you necessarily running into more characters in like a very physical way. We still wanted to make you feel very alone, but we also just wanted a more diverse cast that you could help out and talk to and still really play with that conversation system in a new way. So the walkie-talkie worked really well there and allowing you to meet and bump into characters and not actually have to have them on screen and actually have to like be with them.
Yeah, I think something for... actually, maybe this is also an answer to your prior question, so I'm going backwards a little bit. But it just jumped into my head that something that scared us early on was we can't just rely on the mystery of these ghostly characters at all anymore. Like, it's still going to be powerful, and we can do new things with them. But if the first game, like, so much of the central mystery was who is messing with our cast, why are they messing with our cast, what are the rules that they are bound by, and we unpacked all of that in the first game. So it's like having the same baddies show up was difficult. And so we pretty early on knew that we wanted human antagonists in this one. And we wanted characters that had clearer goals of their own, or at least clearer actions that they were taking of their own. And it wasn't just about boogity boo, something's moving in the background or a light turned on or whatever, and that they were taking real action against you and against the town of Kamina. And it was something that had a clearer sort of ticking clock associated with it. And that really cracked things open for us because, I just know that with that first game, so much of the magic of it was uncovering almost like the nature at play, not just like the bad guys, but it was more like the nature of the world. And this one, for a new player or a returning player, like we didn't want to just rely on that. So getting a real cast of other characters that you can bump into that feel dangerous and that you want to thwart was critical.
Trying to make villains that players want to thwart, crafting that without throwing them in any number of cliche directions that don't fit the game. Where do you start with that, Adam? Like what is for you the heart of a effective baddie?
Yeah, I like all types of bad guys. I like the Magnetos of the world where you're like, I can kind of get where he's coming from. And then the Satans of the world where he's just pure evil. We definitely, I kind of initially with the team fell in love with the idea of if you're not playing as a teenager now, it's a great kind of echo of the first one to have the bad guys of the sequel be just bad teens, just teenagers that have kind of gone on their own Oxenfree mission, but done it with a nefarious intent. And we just thought that was just a really cool concept to build a game off of. So it kind of just all spilled out from there, and it's very cliche to be like, and it just kind of wrote itself after that. But there's only so many directions that like another teenager who's trying to open up a portal. There's only so many reasons why she could really be doing that, and still kind of play with the themes that we really want to explore with this one. So it was really fun to craft those characters and come up with their personalities and their point of views and how they could clash and conflict with what Riley really wants to achieve, not only over the course of the night, but just in her own life too.
Yeah. And I think, and maybe you undersell your awesome work, but I would say that I think in this game in particular, you did such a bang up job of ensuring that the villains, air quotes, are still the heroes of their own story. They do have reasons that you can empathize with. As a studio, I don't think we always need that. We can just lean into the full bad, like you said. But in this case, the fact that every character, their purpose, especially Olivia, feels quite earned. And by the end of the game, you don't just look at her as somebody awful, and rather you almost want to befriend her as well. Was quite a feat and was very intentional because there could have just been a version of this where it's like a wacky cult is trying to wipe everybody out, and it probably could have been pretty cool even that way.
Very cool,
but I love where we landed with the cast of teens.
Yeah.
Oxenfree I was the first time I played a game, and it was when I was in the middle of a really bad contract stint. I had been crunching at that point for weeks on end, throwing stuff against the wall, trying to get something approved and move forward this monster project. And I had randomly picked up a key for Oxenfree. And so I was like, I'll just try this out. 6 or 7 hours later, the sun is up. I have completed Oxenfree, and it was the first time. I'm a guy who tends to work a bit too much, and I'll be honest about that. But it was the first time I just still had some work on the docket, things I could do, tasks on my mind. I just went straight to bed because I was like, what's the fucking point of writing a game in a world where Oxenfree exists? and the beautiful thing about what Night School narrative in general does is that it invokes that feeling while also presenting a road that's like, nah, but it's important for you to keep writing too. I adore the work that you've put into the world. So when you're
Thanks.
looking at a sequel to a game that has impacted so many people, without going into too many spoilers, was there anything that you were able to do, even because a lot of times passed for you too, to acknowledge that foundation that made you really glad you came back to this world, this setting, this cast of characters in this wider town?
That's a very complicated question. And I feel like the thing that we really wanted to hold on to and kind of obsessively protect is just the vibe of the first one. So it's not only the story, it's not only the art, it's not only the music, or the scope of the game, or just kind of any individual element that you can pull out, but just making sure that it still feels like Oxenfree. It still feels like you're returning to that world, and it's a cold, windy day, and you get your headphones on, you're playing this game, and then it doesn't feel like we're showing up and we're now wearing fur coats and top hats. It's like, welcome to the brand new amazing sequel. Like, we're not trying to entertain you, we're not trying to like wow you. We're just really trying to be authentic to that feeling of that world. But then the other thing on top of that too, which is basically the same thing, but just making sure that the characters still felt like characters that deserve your time and deserve your attention. It's a big thing to ask someone to take 6 to 10 hours of your life and watch these little people walk around on a map and interact with them and talk with them and care about them. And with After Party, the goal was always just to make you laugh. It's like, as long as we're making you laugh once every couple of minutes, great, we're doing our job. And with Oxenfree II, though, it's definitely a different, more personal, more kind of intimate goal there with these characters. We just really want you to believe them, to believe in them, to not kind of see the writing construction of them, to just see them as just whole people with little lives that we're just kind of getting a night of. So yeah, just making sure to maintain that vibe and that kind of spirit of the first one, and just making sure, that the characters really earn your time.
To have like any clarity or confidence in us being able to crack the code of that vibe, though, it took time away from the game. Like, I think honestly, it took us like years away from the first game to actually look at it as a cohesive thing. Like right after we shipped, we were proud of it. We loved it, but we, like anybody, I'm sure you feel this on the daily. Like, you see every flaw, you see every weird line read, you see every little animation going the wrong way. You remember the thing that got cut that you thought would have been cool there. And it took us literally years to look at it as like a newcomer and a new player. And when we came back, we're like, wow, this is a pretty cool game. Like, this is fun. Let's now we understand this universe. But when we were so close to it, I think literally for the first 2 years, it would have been hard for us to articulate what made the game special in a cohesive way. We would have been more like, well, it's all about Alex, or it's all about this aspect of the art, or it's all about Andy's audio, depending on what day of the week we talked about it. And then now we can look at it through a lens more of like, I mean, this is going to sound corny, but like, it's a universe that we understand of all of those things playing together. And we inherently now just get that vibe. And I think we can have it be second nature to return to that world and know what's right or wrong. But I think we would have made some bad mistakes if we tried to jump right into a sequel. I think we would have done the top hat and fur coat by mistake.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you avoid that pressure, especially being an indie studio? Even if the game is successful, people want to give you more money to do the thing again. So how did you avoid that pressure to jump in when you weren't ready to do the best version of the sequel?
We were definitely still in the like, we need money moment. And so Mr. Robot, like, to be perfectly honest, that's how that came about. Like, we were in a moment where we're like, let's do a bridge project. And then it became the most like punk rock, shoot from the hip, yet awesome streamlined design that I think we've maybe done. And that felt really, really good. And that bought us that space for maybe, let's say, half a year to a year.
How long of a dev cycle was that?
Oh my God, it was brutal. It was months. It was like 4 months, the whole game.
4 months to build that entire game?
Swear to God.
The entire game. Yeah.
It was like a website contract.
Yeah, exactly. No, we went in and we pitched it of like, well, you're going to be playing on a cell phone. And like 2 weeks later, we had the story outline that we worked with the producers of the show. And then, yeah, we wrote it in 3 months and coded it, and it was done.
It was bonkers.
Yeah.
Wild.
But to the like, how did we buy that space? In parallel, while we were making that, we were concepting what became Next Stop Nowhere, which is the Apple Arcade game that we did, and concepting After Party simultaneously. And I think I don't know. Yeah, we had some folks reach out for sure about Oxenfree II, but we, at that moment, I think our studio's identity was only synonymous with Oxenfree, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't become only synonymous with Oxenfree. Like, as much as we adored it, we were like, we want this studio to be capable of doing a variety of things, a variety of genres, a variety of different world building. You know, when we would look over at the work that Jordan Peele was doing, we were like, we kind of want to be that. Or we'd look over at Double Fine, or we'd look over at Leica. We'd be like, there's like a real through line tonally and creatively, but there's very different stories happening. And it was a pretty central objective for us to like, if we were able to keep the studio going, we wanted to create a little bit broader like portfolio. So it wasn't necessarily that, I mean, I bet honestly, if somebody came to us like throwing gold briefcases of money or something at us, we probably would have just made Oxenfree II, but we were in scrappy mode still, and we had other ideas that we thought were cool that we wanted to try to bring to life.
Yeah.
So for Oxenfree II, is there a specific challenge that you're really excited that you had the opportunity to solve, and how did you solve it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of the challenges of Oxenfree 2 was can we tell a story in this world that you are someone who's older, you are someone who's in your mid 30s dealing with adult issues, with adult themes, and still feel like Oxenfree, still feel like that same world of game. And still be participating in the same kind of weird quasi-scientific, quasi-magical rules that we had established in the first one. And then another kind of just mechanical challenge that we were interested in tackling was just can you be interrupting a conversation you're in on basically taking a phone call and kind of give the player more freedom to just start conversations with people off screen. So if you walk into a big old environment and you've heard on the walkie-talkie that so-and-so has some information, can you make Jacob shut up for a bit and call them and ask them a question and then get back into it? And really feeling smooth and really feeling like, yep, that's how that would go. Which was it turned out to be a much bigger challenge than we thought.
But, just like everything in game dev,
like everything we do. But those would be the two big ones.
Yeah, I think the walkie is a design concept that we started to scratch at in After Party with our fake version of Twitter, which was called Bicker. I think we wanted Bicker to be a more active, sort of asynchronous communication tool in that game, and it became more of just like a feedback thing that was really cool and fun and filled out the world, but it wasn't necessarily a system, like that the player got to interact with that much. But in this one, yeah, the walkie being a way to make sure that there were parallel storylines happening around Kamina and that it wasn't all the action is just on screen. And to Adam's point about like all of our other games, conversations start when other people start them, right? Like you have to wait to respond for the most part. There are some times where you can do it or via an interactable. But in this case, it was like, let's have both of these systems talk to each other. And the thing that has been the most fun is to watch how people interact with that walkie, because before taking the next big step after placing a certain transmitter. A lot of people want to check in with their contacts, see how they're doing, like make sure that their little mini side quest is moving forward appropriately. So it just, like, even though it is a subtle addition to the systems that exist in the game, it pretty dramatically changes how you think about the game while you're playing it. And that's the most fun stuff for us, is like, what's the game that players are playing up in their head, not necessarily what's always on screen.
What you gave them essentially was a thing always in the back of their head of, I can always do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part of then fulfilling that expectation? Because I assume among them is just at each point where someone would want to call up. I'm reminded of the Metal Gear Solid codec, where after every single major thing would happen, I call up everybody.
Yeah.
That's what we bid it off of, by the way. Was that? I mean, a big part of it was that. But sorry, go on.
No, yeah, it was absolutely that. That was our major source of inspiration. Just because, it was so fun. It was so fun to just be like, oh, I just beat this boss. I wonder what my boss has to say. So yeah, for us though, it was just really from the outline level, just making sure that each character you interact with has some expertise, has something that they would be. That the player would hopefully be interested in finding out what their perspective or opinion on would either be on an event that's just happened that they could be aware of, or just the environment that you're in or the conversation that you're having. That there's at least some character that you could have potentially bumped into or heard on the radio or the walkie that you might just want to hear what their opinion would be. Initially, we were thinking that it would be even more kind of helpful for puzzles, where it's like, oh, you're going to walk in and it can kind of be like a hint line. But that started to push us to just make kind of more unnecessarily complicated puzzles that then you kind of would require this hint line for. And I'm like, it's kind of draining the fun of like talking to Jacob and casually solving these things. So we just really leaned into the character stories on the walkies, that hopefully they are just very enticing for the player to kind of want to continue to dig into.
Yeah, I think the events of what are happening that night impacting these other people who are living their own lives that are rich and real and fulfilled, and them basically being on their own quest that we don't get to see, was sort of a sea change for us in terms of how we approached it, as opposed to them being a bunch of like dispatchers waiting in the wings to help you with hints. And those stories do branch, right? It's not like you're just tapping in and listening to a radio play. Like, they do have their own things that you can push and pull at for them. So it's almost like we're, in some ways, we as the player character are their hint line, you know? And that felt really cool, because then it was like, oh, the world doesn't just revolve around Riley. Like, everybody here that's nearby is impacted by this event that's taking place. So I don't know. Yeah, it freed up the design constraints a bit, and it made you connect with those other characters more, and because they weren't just tools.
It sounds like the main difficulty wasn't even writing for those branches and for fulfilling that content expectation that players would have. It was making sure that this tool didn't occupy the wrong place in the overall landscape of the game or end up distorting it.
Exactly. Yeah. We definitely didn't want to feel like just a mechanical tool, like Sean says. We just wanted to feel like characters that are going through their own things.
And how do you feel about how it's been received now?
Great.
We're happy. I think, I don't know. I mean, we definitely were bracing for perhaps responses that are more like, I wanted to play as Alex, or I wanted it to look totally different, or I wanted rocket launchers, or, there's a million different things that you think in the back of your head might happen. And because a lot of the effort that we did in this one was about nuanced improvements to what existed before, as opposed to throwing out the baby with the bathwater, we thought that those things might not land, but fortunately they've really landed. Like, people are keying into how those walkie relationships work, or they're keying into how much more like refined our map and navigation of Kamina is than before. And a lot of people, I mean, more than anything, they're just like keying into the feeling of playing as Riley in a way that surprisingly is, for a lot of players, even more impactful than playing as Alex in the first one. We're hearing that a lot from either folks who are at the precipice of parenthood, or at the precipice of taking on a new job, or, all these types of things that Riley and the cast sort of around her can represent in the game. So it's been a really positive response. Of course, there's a few responses here and there that are more broadly like walking simulators, meh, but we're not going to win those people over, and that's fine. We just wanted to tell a really spooky, heartfelt story with cool characters that ideally does make you feel something at the end. Did you feel like you had to make a tough choice? Did you feel like you lamented what happened? Did you feel like you were scared? Maybe you cried, laughed, whatever. But yeah, in general, really, really happy with the response so far.
I'm really glad to hear that. So I know y'all have earned a much deserved rest. It sounds like tech debt and figuring out what the future of the studio is, what's next. But what would you say are things that people should look out for next from Night School? Or what's the thing that you most want to explore, again, outside of an uncomfortable Tim and Eric video game where you spend 15 minutes tapping the A button to zoom in closer on a man's face?
Other than that,
we greenlit. Do you hear that, Netflix? I think very broadly speaking, we referenced this a little bit earlier, but like finding new player verbs that can impact story is really exciting for us. So finding new things that aren't just about talking, that can allow the game to say, I acknowledge you, player, for your input, and make the player feel like they're shaping their experience in new ways is really exciting for us. So that probably means maybe a little bit more mechanically rich stuff. That probably means different types of perspectives. I think we never intended to templatize our games as tiny characters moving left to right with dialogue bubbles over their heads. We may well still do games like that, but it's not intended to be our identity. So yeah, finding that new player verbs, I think, is really critical. The other thing is just like more cool new worlds. We really like building worlds. We really like building stories alongside those mechanics, as opposed to just trying to ham fist a set of mechanics into an existing world. We are not afraid of taking on other people's IP, but so far we've really just enjoyed digging in and building stories that are ripe to be pushed and pulled at via gameplay mechanics. So and I don't think any of the worlds will be lacking the vibe that we've had in the past. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, God, you stole the good ones. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of reiterate the new layer verbs, just just having different ways to interact with the story. That's not just conversationally and like very obvious, like, you can go left down this spoke or right up the stairway there, but finding ways to really surprise the players with actions that they're taking that they don't even realize are choices in the moment, but the game is paying attention and recording it and reacting specifically to that quote unquote choice that they've made. I think is the biggest thing that I'm most excited to really get into.
That is exciting. And for those who are beginning their own journey, either in narrative or in starting a studio, what advice do you have at this point?
Turn, run. No, I'm kidding.
Valid advice
for some subset of folks, perhaps. But yeah, I think in the big scheme of things, just try to keep it simple. Like, I think really don't over-engineer things or make them so myopic that you can't explain them to your friend that isn't in the game industry. Like find something that you think you can do really well and do it authentically, and just lean in hard on that, and don't accidentally let feature creep happen, because it will, no matter what. Like, don't keep adding things because you think you just need to. Just find something that you think you can do that's really special and singular, which is hard, right? Like, when I'm saying keep it simple, I don't mean that's easy. It's just more like keep it streamlined and crystal clear, and focus on that and make it the best version of that. I think we both in the past, both at this studio and in our prior lives, have fallen victim to trying to do too many things or contort ourselves into somebody else's vision or somebody else's business model of the month. And we just try to avoid that if you can. If not, take those gigs and then do the one for them and one for yourself.
Thank you all so much for your time. And for those who want to dig into the history of Night School and all the amazing things you've made outside of Mr. Robot, which has been cruelly ripped away from us, where can they find you and the studio and your work?
Yeah, we're fortunately on all kinds of stuff. I think, if you look at essentially all of our games up until now, we're multi-platform. If you want to find us on social, on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, X, we are at Night Schoolers. Everywhere else, we are at Night School Studio. So you can check us out on, TikTok, Instagram, etc. Nightschoolstudio.com is a great place to start to find all of our games, and we have links to where to find them. Our most recent game, of course, came out a few weeks ago, Oxenfree II. That's available on PlayStation, Switch, PC, and on Netflix. You can actually just, if you've got Netflix on your phone, bust it open, tap download, and you can get Oxenfree 1 and 2 with your subscription. But otherwise, they're on all those other various storefronts. And I think maybe nightschoolstudio.com is the best hub to start.
Yeah.
Nightschoolstudio.com. Thanks so much for your time, y'all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.